Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something pretty mind-bending. We've got Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis Tertius,
Okay.
a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, and we've got The Law of One,
Okay.
which is this channeled text you might be thinking, how on earth do these two relate?
Right.
Um, well, get ready to have your assumptions challenged, because today we're going to be talking about the nature of reality.
It is really fascinating to consider that these two sources, despite coming from such different places and written in such different styles, both really invite us to examine what we think of as real.
Yeah.
Borges does this through his fictional world of Tlön, and the raw material presents this really detailed cosmology,
Yeah.
and they both kind of push us to look at how thought and belief might actually have the power to shape what we experience as reality.
Right. Okay, so let's jump into Tlön right off the bat. This story hooks you from the very beginning with this like mysterious encyclopedia entry, and it really unfolds kind of like a detective novel.
Yeah, that's so true. So the entry describes this place called Uqbar, and at first it seems completely made up. Borges and his friend Bio Casares, they get really interested in all these vague details, and there are these references to these fantastical regions like Meglesnes, and then all of a sudden there's this link to an actual historical person, Johannes Valentinus Andrea, who's known for describing a made-up society himself.
Right.
So it's as if Borges is intentionally blurring the lines between what's real and what's fiction and drawing you deeper into this mystery.
Right, and he doesn't stop there. He even mentions that one of the books mentioned in the Uqbar entry exists in a real bookstore catalog. You start to ask yourself, wait a minute, is Uqbar real? Is any of this real?
Right.
And just when you think you're starting to understand things,
Yeah.
we're introduced to Tlön, this whole other world that's kind of hidden inside this encyclopedia.
It's like Tlön is being revealed to us slowly, piece by piece, and that kind of mirrors how we discover things and put together our own understanding of reality in the real world.
Right.
What Borges seems to be hinting at is that ideas, even fictional ones, have this power to come into our reality and change it. He even goes as far as to predict that the world will eventually become Tlön.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. For the reality of Tlön is completely different from ours. It's ruled by idealism. This idea that thought literally shapes reality.
Right.
It's a wild idea, especially for someone like me who is used to thinking about reality as this fixed external thing.
Yeah, imagine a world where if enough people believe in something, it actually becomes their reality. The people at Tlön don't share our idea of objective truth to them. Reality is subjective fluid,
Okay, yeah.
constantly being molded by what everyone thinks together.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this idea, the power of belief that thought can shape reality. Isn't that a core concept in the Law of One as well?
Absolutely, and it's so fascinating how these two sources come to this idea from completely different directions.
Hmm.
The Law of One lays out this incredibly intricate cosmology where thought is the fundamental building block of reality. The universe is made up of different densities of consciousness,
Okay.
and our thoughts, our beliefs, they aren't just passive things happening in our heads. They
Yeah.
can ripple out and shape the world around us. It's like that saying, thoughts become things, but on a huge cosmic scale.
So essentially, both Tlön and the Law of One are saying that we're not just watching reality play out, we're active participants in creating it.
Yeah.
It's kind of empowering, but maybe a little scary too.
Right.
Right? You know, if we're shaping reality with our thoughts, that's a big responsibility.
It is a really profound question, and it's one that both sources encourage us to think deeply about. But before we go too far down that road, I think it's worth exploring another really interesting concept that connects Tlön and the Law of One. The idea that our understanding of reality might be way more limited than we realize.
Okay.
Like, what if everything you thought you knew about the world was just a small piece of a much bigger, more complex reality?
That is definitely a humbling thought.
So yeah, like what if everything we think we know about the world is just this teeny tiny piece of a much bigger picture, a much more complex reality?
That is a humbling thought. And I remember in Tlön, that idea of limited perception,
Hmm.
it's really shown through how the people there think they have this whole system based on what they call a Ronir. And I always found that concept super fascinating.
Oh yeah, the Verniers are really key to understanding how Tlön works. They're like these fleeting subjective realities, almost like very vivid dreams. And the people of Tlön are constantly creating them and then letting them go.
So are you saying they're like switching between different realities all the time?
Exactly. And the amazing thing is they don't see these Hronirs as just illusions or made up things to them. Each Hronir is a real and complete reality for as long as it exists, even if it's only for a short time. It really makes you wonder about how stable and objective our own reality is, right? What if our reality is just one of many Hronir?
It's like they live in a world where dreams and waking life are always kind of blurring together. And, in a way, doesn't the Law of One talk about something similar with the idea of the veil?
You got it. That's a really important connection in the Law of One. The veil is described as this kind of metaphysical thing that separates our conscious mind from our unconscious knowledge, so it limits how much of reality we can actually perceive it. Basically keeps us from fully understanding the true nature of existence and our connection to the creator.
So are you saying we're all kind of like the people of Tlön, living in our own self-made Ronir, but we're not aware of the bigger reality that exists beyond the veil?
It's a pretty fascinating parallel, right? Both the Hronir of Tlön and the veil in the Law of One, they point to these limits in what we can perceive. And in both cases, it seems like we've chosen on some level to limit our own awareness. In Tlön, they embrace this constant change of the Hronir, while in the Law of One, we've agreed to this veil that hides the full picture from us.
But if we have the potential for this wider awareness, why would we choose to limit ourselves? That doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, in the Law of One, this limitation is presented as something that's necessary for us to grow spiritually. The veil gives us this experience of duality, the contrast between light and dark, good and evil.
Right.
And it's through facing these challenges and making these choices that we learn and evolve.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like we need these contrasting experiences to really get what reality is all about and our place in it, and this idea of learning through challenges. It actually reminds me of another thing from the Law of One, the idea of catalyst.
Right, and catalyst refers to all those things that happen to us, the experiences we have, even the people we meet. They challenge our beliefs and push us outside our comfort zones.
Right.
They're chances for us to grow and change.
So could we see the Hronir in Tlön as a form of catalyst for the people who live there? I mean, each Hronir gives them a whole set of unique experiences.
Okay.
Some are good, some are tough, and they learn and change within those temporary realities.
That's a great point. Each Hronir could be seen as like a mini version of their whole spiritual journey, a training ground where they refine their understanding of themselves and of what reality is.
And that links back to the cyclical nature of reality that the Law of One talks about. We go through these cycles of being born, living, and dying, experiencing different levels of consciousness, and meeting all these catalysts all to learn and grow.
Exactly. Both Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis Tertius, and the Law of One highlight this cyclical nature of existence, this ongoing process of creation, destruction, and then rebirth again. And within these cycles, we have the freedom to choose how we respond to these catalysts we meet to shape our own journeys.
And this brings us to another big point that both sources emphasize free will. I think it's especially interesting how free will works in Tlön. Their reality might seem super strange to us with all these shifting Ronirs, but they still have the freedom to choose how they interact with and make sense of those realities, right?
Absolutely. Even though their world is shaped by idealism, by the power of everyone's thoughts combined, they still have individual choice. It's not a system where they're just controlled by their thoughts. They have the freedom to create and experience those Ronir in line with their own will to shape their own paths within that bigger reality they share.
So in the end, both Tlön and the Law of One are all about empowering us to become conscious creators of our own realities.
Yeah.
They're encouraging us to recognize how powerful our thoughts and beliefs are, to understand that we're not just passive bystanders in this cosmic play.
Exactly. And that's where things get really exciting and maybe a little bit scary if we accept that idea that thought shapes reality, that we have this inherent creative power. It makes us ask some pretty big questions about how we're using that power.
All right, so we're back and ready to kind of wrap up our deep dive into Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis Tertius, and the Law of One. I got to say, this whole exploration has really stretched my brain, and I feel like we've only just started to touch on all these ideas.
Yeah, I agree. There's just so much to unpack in both of these works. And it's really amazing how, even though they're so different in form and where they come from, they both seem to land on this similar conclusion that reality, the way we experience it, isn't as fixed or objective as we usually think.
It's almost like Borges and the raw material are both saying, hey, what if everything you thought you knew about the world was just a tiny little piece of a much bigger and more complex reality? What if you have way more power to shape that reality than you ever imagined?
Yeah, exactly. It's both exciting and a little bit scary, right? To think that we might have more power to shape our reality than we ever realized. It really makes you question everything and look at the beliefs that shape how you experience the world.
It makes you wonder, what kind of reality are we all making right now with our thoughts and beliefs? Are we accidentally creating our own version of Tlön, where all our biases are actually shaping the fabric of our reality?
That's the big question, isn't it? And both Borges and the Law of One want us to think about that. Remember how in Tlön they have those chronier, those temporary realities they keep creating and getting rid of?
Right, and those Froner, they start to bleed into their real world, right?
Yeah.
Changing their language, their culture, how they see time and space. It's like their imaginations start changing the very fabric of their existence.
Exactly. And in a way, aren't we doing something similar? We tell ourselves stories about ourselves, about the world, about what's possible and what's not. And these stories, whether we know it or not, have a huge impact on how we live and interact with reality.
So it's like we're all living inside our own little Froner, our own made-up realities, and all these Froner are bumping into each other and influencing each other, creating this really complex web of collective
And
experience.
the important question is, what kind of collective Ronir are we making? Are we making a reality based on fear and separation and scarcity? Or are we choosing to make one that's based on love, connection, and abundance?
This is where I think that the law of one's focus on service to others becomes super relevant. It's saying the path to a more harmonious and fulfilling reality is choosing love over fear, caring about other people's well-being instead of just our own.
Absolutely. The Law of One basically proposes that when we align ourselves with the idea of service to others, we help create a reality that reflects those values. It's about understanding that we're all connected, that we're part of this larger web of consciousness, and that everything we do and choose has a ripple effect that goes way beyond just us.
So if we think about that in terms of where we are now, it's like we're at a fork in the road. We can keep going down a path of fear and division, creating a reality that reflects those negative things, or we can actively choose to live with love, compassion, and understanding, trying to create a more peaceful and fair world for ourselves and for everyone who comes after us.
It's definitely a tough job, but I really do think it's possible both Borges and the Law of One give us this little bit of hope, a vision of reality that's more flexible, more responsive to what we consciously choose. They remind us that we're not just watching things happen, but we're active participants in how reality unfolds.
That's a really powerful thing to remember as we try to figure out these crazy times. It's like this reminder that we can change our own realities and help create a collective reality that's closer to what we really hope for.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive today, I really want to encourage you to think about these ideas. What kind of Ronier are you creating in your own life? How are your thoughts and beliefs shaping the things that happen to you? And what choices can you make today to help make the world a more loving, compassionate, and harmonious place?
It's all about realizing that we have this creative power and using it wisely and remembering that we're all connected.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. But remember, the journey doesn't stop here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep dreaming of a better world until next time.
Stay curious out there.